such an honor to be here today. And I get to like a really fun role today. I'll be moderating the panel. So let me uplift and highlight who is going to be on this panel. We're going to have Chanel Davis, who works as the program manager of Austin Youth River Watch. Chanel Davis is the program coordinator for Austin Youth River Watch. Prior to Austin Youth River Watch, Chanel served as an AmeriCorps member with 4-H Capital as an animal science team leader. While at 4-H, she developed inquiry-based STEM curriculums, cared for program animals, and supported team members with lesson planning and behavior management. She gained outdoor education experience through working as a camp counselor with the New York Department of Conservation, community outreach with Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, and study abroad trips to Hawaii, South Africa, and Costa Rica. She graduated from Canisius College in Buffalo, New York in 2018 with a BS in animal behavior, ecology, and conservation, and environmental studies and an MS in education. That's Chanel Davis. We also have on the panel Marisa Oliva, who is with the Rio Grande Valley Health and Nature Liaison and Texas Children in Nature. Marisa Oliva Rodriguez is a native Texan transplanted from San Antonio to the floodplains of Rio Grande Valley, managing the Edinburgh Scenic Wetlands and World Birding Center from 2004 until recently. Oliva Rodriguez has spent her career helping children and families connect to nature through innovative programming and with the creation of beautiful outdoor spaces. A graduate of Texas A&M University and Pennsylvania State University, she's raising 2 young naturalists with her husband, Roy. That was Marisa. And we also have on our panel, Sarah Stapleton, assistant professor at University of Oregon in the Education Studies Department, and also core faculty in environmental studies and an affiliate faculty member with UO Food Studies. Before earning her doctorate, she taught middle and high school environmental science, physical science, chemistry, and general science at public schools in California, and as a Peace Corps volunteer in Gambia, West Africa. Sarah is credentialed by the state of California to teach chemical and biological sciences. At the UO, Sarah primarily works with undergraduates in the Education Foundations program, pre-service teachers in the UO Teach Masters program, and doctoral students in the Critical and Sociocultural Studies in Education program. Sarah strives for community-based scholarship and service. She currently serves on the board of directors of Food for Lane County, the food bank serving their community. Sarah is also part of the steering committee of Oregon Educators for Climate Education, a group working to advocate for Oregon state legislation for climate education. Just to give you a little bit of the official biographies of our great panel, you'll also be hearing from them in just a moment. And I'm going to pass it back over to Jonathan. Did you want to talk about the poll?
Yes, so we have one question so far. I think we have a couple more to come. But the first one is, do you work with youth? And it looks to be about 50-50. And we have, let's see if I can do the other questions really quick. But I knew that, Nicole, you had a exercise to warm us up. So why don't we do that, and then I will put the polls after that.
Excellent idea. Okay. So for this next part, this is I will invite you to turn your camera on. It'll be more fun if you're able to turn your camera on, if that's safe for you, and if you're able to do that. If you're not able to turn your camera on, that's also totally fine. I'll give you an option to participate in that way. So we are going to be doing a little sociometric questions. All that means is I'm going to say a statement, and then you're going to let me know with your body in your video how much you agree or disagree with that statement. So if I say a statement and you really, really agree, you're going to get as close as possible and comfortable, however close you feel like as close as you want with your camera. If you really, really disagree with a statement, or that doesn't describe you, you're going to get as far away from your camera as possible while maybe also still technically being in the panel. I've done this one with young people, and it gets creative with what far away means. So figure out what your close is and what your far away is. Very close is I really, really agree, or that really, really describes me. That's not me at all. That doesn't describe me as really far away. And then you've got a lot of room in between. If you are not able to join us on screen, you can also participate in the chat. So in this case, let's say 10 means you really, really agree. That really, really describes you. And then a 0 would be like if you are far away. That doesn't describe you at all. And I'll ask a question, give everyone a chance to kind of position themselves or put in the chat their number. I'll remind you of what all of the directions were. And then you don't have to explain yourself. We're just trying to get a temperature of the room, see who's here, see what topics we're interested in. And it's also a fun way for us to get to know what you would like to hear about versus us telling you what we think you should hear about, which is going to come up as a core theme in what we talk about with young people. All right. So we practiced with the poll, and we're going to use the same question that Jonathan just gave us in the poll. So the first question I'm going to ask you in our bodies as a sociometric question is, I work with young people. So if that is true for you, you get closer. If it is not true for you, you'll get farther away. If you feel somewhere in the middle, sometimes we do, feel free to kind of find yourself in the middle. So I work with young people. And then when you find your position, kind of look around the room. Maybe, I think there's 2 different panels. You can see who else is in the room. Excellent. All right, reset yourself to neutral, normal person on Zoom, not too close, not too far away. Yeah, excellent. I'm actually I appreciate that there are questions coming out, and I'm actually going to keep them a little bit vague because we're going to talk about those things in there. And I like that this question of what does young people mean is coming up. That came up in our discussion. So I'm actually not going to answer any of the questions for now. I'm going to let you interpret them for yourself. And also for time. All right, I'm gonna ask a couple more questions just to get us warmed up. Let's see. Okay, the next one is, I feel I can do something about climate change. I feel I can do something about climate change. So if you really, really agree, get close. If you really, really disagree, get far away. And this is where you are today, where you are contextually. I feel I can do something about climate change. Excellent. I'm seeing in the chat, kind of witnessing folks there. Excellent. I'm getting some numbers in. All right. And reset yourself. You got to get we've got a nice temperature of the room. All right. I've got 2 more questions. We'll go a little bit quicker on these now that I don't necessarily need to give you the instructions. This next one is, I feel anxious, or I feel anxiety around climate change. I feel anxiety around climate change. Very close if that feels like that describes you. Really far away if that doesn't describe you at all. I feel anxious about climate change. Yeah. Make sure you take the opportunity to look around and see kind of what the temperature is in the room. Very interesting. All right, reset yourself. One last question, and then I will have warmed you up and gotten you far. And thank you for playing with me in this way. The last question I have is, I feel hopeful about the future. I feel hopeful about the future. If that really describes you, get very close to your camera or give us a bigger number. If that doesn't describe you, get farther away, a smaller number. I feel hopeful about the future. Yeah, and make sure you take an opportunity to look around, see what the room is feeling, see what the room is thinking. Nice. All right, reset yourself. Thank you for warming up with me. I really appreciate participating with your bodies. I know that's not always what is called for in Zoom meetings, but we're trying stuff out. I'll pass it back over to you, Jonathan, for our our polls.
Yes, so we have, I just launched one more poll. It looks like the second poll around whether or not folks here are parents. It was also split. It looked about almost 60% parents. And then the last poll is just trying to get a sense of what spaces folks work in, whether university, nonprofit, K through 12, et cetera. And just give that another minute, another few seconds, just to help us kind of shape the directions that we want to go with our panelists. Looks like we have a lot of folks in the university, some policy, only one K through 12 at the moment, and a couple nonprofit. Yeah, and so I think, just getting a sense of our audience today. And yes, again, the Google Doc is live, and people can add their questions and resources and contact there. I will be monitoring that to get our questions for the panelists. But I know that we have one coming in, but we might have a couple to start with. So yeah, Nick, do you want to start as people kind of poke in some questions?
I definitely would. Yeah, like Jonathan said, we're really hoping to have the audience drive what we're talking about here on the panel. We've just put that Google Doc in the chat, so you can put your questions there, or if you see a question that looks like what you would like, you can upvote it and it'll be more likely to be asked, depending on time. And I've introduced our panelists in a formal way, but I thought, and I haven't warned them about this, so hopefully this is okay. I would love to hear a quick sentence from each panelist, and I'll model this, of starting with "I am from," and feel free to give us lots of sensory descriptions. So for instance, I am from sticky humidity and thunderstorms in the afternoon. Chanel, can I pass it to you? I am from.
Oh, yes. Yes, my name is Chanel, and I am from sandy, oceany, salty coast of many places. And I'll pass it to Marisa.
You're on mute.
Thank you.
There you go.
Do that often. Hi, folks. I'm Marisa Oliva. I am from almost the furthest place you can go on the tip of Texas, way down south, where it is high, where we do get rain, but less than most places in the US, but where it's very green because we're near a river. I don't know if we say where we're from, but
Perfectly done. Perfectly done. As with the getting close and far away, totally open to interpretation. Lovely to hear where you're from. And Sarah, I am from.
I am from so many places, it's difficult to answer this sentence.
Also very real. Thank you all. It's great to hear a little bit about you, and we'll get to learn more about you and your perspectives with some questions. So we've prepared a first question, and then Jonathan will be kind of taking a look at our Google Docs to make sure some of the questions that are really getting lifted up are asked after this. But our first question is, what are strategies for addressing and easing climate anxiety with youth? So what are strategies for addressing and easing climate anxiety with youth? And feel free to give us a little bit of background on your program. And I'll keep a timer for 3 minutes per person. And I'll give you a little warning. Who would like to take our question first? what are strategies? I'll also put it in the chat. What are strategies for addressing and easing climate anxiety with youth?
I'll start only because where I'm at is more in the beginning of the conversation, which is awareness of the natural environment. So prior to this position that I hold now with Texas Children Nature Network, we were with the nature. I ran a nature center, and really here in the Rio Grande Valley, we have a really large population over this 4-county area. We have a lot of people from recent immigrants to people who've been here for a very long time, but our nature down here has been used for farming and ranching, and our cities developed, and now we have bigger agriculture. So there's sort of a disconnect between our youth and our families and the outdoors, where maybe our grandparents who were here farmed the land and made a living out of it, but it was very hard work, and they didn't want that for their children. So their children moved into the cities, and that's happening everywhere. And so because of this disconnect, there's a lot of things that families have lost the ability for, knowing how to garden, knowing how to make a living off the land, being out in the wilderness. And so for a lot of our youth, it's a big wake-up call when they realize what the amazing resource we have down here. So it's for us, we're at the basic level of making sure they understand the importance of our environment to our lives, and how we need to protect it. And climate change, which is very real, it's affecting us in so many different ways. That's a little bit of a harder conversation down here for us to have, because we're still in the raising awareness stage. At least that's where a lot of us have been, is making those direct connections.
Thank you so much.
I'd love to take a chance at it next. So I work with a local nonprofit called Austin Youth River Watch, and we're an after school and summer program that works with high school, and we also have an internship program for those who have graduated from high school. But for majority of this, I'll be talking about our high school students. And so we do like outdoor environmental education stuff, like water quality testing, E. coli testing, camping, canoeing, picking up trash, planting trees, all those sorts of things is what we tend to do after school and during the summer. And so I would say, like, in terms of climate anxiety about the greater world in general, what activities that we incorporate into our programming that help with that kind of help the students connect with those feelings and, naming them and talking about them, as opposed to feeling them and feeling like you're on your own, is the joy of being outside, the joy of spending time in nature, doing that, with mindfulness practices in lots of different ways, and not necessarily just like sitting and thinking. That's not always applicable to, like, your young high school students, but we might draw, we might listen to music, we might go out and play games or whatever it is. And that's what mindfulness is to them. And then specifically for our program, we work predominantly with Black and Brown youth from lower income, historically disadvantaged communities. And so a really big reason why so many of our students really love our program and continue to come back year after year is the connection and the community that they feel amongst each other as Black and Brown young people. And then also taking that group of people, and my job is to create spaces, facilitate having those positive interactions and memories and connection with nature and the natural world. And so by getting them together and having that space, and then being able to have some joy and some love and connection to the natural world, is how they tell me that they tend to feel a little a little woosah about things in general, not even just climate anxiety, but, you know, standardized testing, applying for college, all the things that they've got going on in life. So.
And hi, everyone. Well, so as a researcher, I'm really grateful that we're asking this question, and the ways in which we've needed to work with young people in climate change have changed drastically as we feel more and more and more climate effects. So the levels of anxiety of youth are really, I mean, just exponentially increasing, and that has to really shape the way we talk and communicate and teach about climate change in major ways. And so one of the most important things that we see both in research and that I see with my own students, because I teach a teaching for climate activism class here at the University of Oregon with my pre-service teachers, is that we have to really, the need for hope is just, I mean, we can't underestimate how much we need to teach for hope, and that it needs to sort of envelop every little piece of every time we talk and think about climate change, because one of the most dangerous things we can do is move to a place of despair, because despair means inaction and despair means giving up. And we just can't afford to do that. We can't leave students in that space, and we can't just have any of us be in that space. And so one of the best ways that we found through a lot of research, including my own research, is to get through hope is through action. And so action means a lot of things. I think sometimes people think, oh, it means, you know, did you put solar panels on your roof, or are you eating mostly a plant-based diet? But it's a lot of things. It's both daily actions and things that youth can have more or less control of. We have to be really mindful of that, of first of all, the context of the youth you're working with, their age and their ability to do things. So like if you're working with young people who are not able to vote yet, talking to them about voting is probably not a useful thing. It will make them feel really frustrated. If you're working with really young kids, I really love what Marisol and Chanel are talking about. The connection to nature is a really important way to foster a love for multi-species and for this amazing planet that we live on. And so that's really important. A love of place and a caring, so that they're working out of a place of care rather than fear, right? So that you do it out of love rather than fear, because I think that's a really motivating force for most of us, right? Is a deep love. Thinking deeply about their context too, in terms of their sociodemographics, right? And what opportunities they have available, and also what traumas they've experienced in their life, and how that affects the way they might see things is really important, and the ways that they might see action in their community and needs in their community. So all these things are really important to keep in mind: who the students are, what their needs are. And then finally, if they've had any climate trauma, I speak coming from Oregon. We have had massive trauma in our community and our whole state in the last few years with wildfire. We just had a really difficult weekend in our area with wildfire, where a number of folks have been evacuated very close to where we are here. And many of us have went through a lot of trauma in 2020 around fires. And so that's something that I bring to the front and center when we work, and we think about what it is to live through fire, and thinking about Indigenous perspectives around fire and the need for fire as a way to kind of see hope through that. So hope through trauma is a really important thing too, but it's really context specific. I could go on and on, but I just wanted to, just a few things that come to mind.
Thank you all for getting us started. I see, Jonathan, I see a question that is like I see two that could be awesome follow-ups to this, but I didn't know if you were seeing kind of a consensus happening in the Google Doc.
Well, there's one question that's been asterisked a couple of times. That's certainly a good follow-up question. I think let's go with that one.
Yeah. Oh, I see it. There we are. This is an excellent follow-up question. Thank you to the asker of this and the upvoters of this one. The question for the panel is, what is the mental health burden of climate change for young people of color? I'll also place it in the chat.
So down here in the Rio Grande Valley where we live, we have a pretty large population that live in poverty. Um, 24 to 26% of children live under poverty. The majority of families here make less than 50,000 a year. And so it's really hard for families to make their ends meet. And there's, because of that, you have a lot of multi-generational families living close together in households, which can be good and bad. There are, if you live with many family members, adult family members, sometimes there's a lot of stress. There's also a lot of single parents. There's a pretty large percentage of women raising children on their own. And again, not only that, but they're raising them in poverty, where sometimes the main woman, whether it's a grandparent, there's also a lot of grandparents raising children. And I know that's happening all over, but they're pretty high numbers here in the Valley. And because of that, the children are facing lots of stress. They're a lot of it having to do with poverty and being in close quarters with other family members. And sometimes that's a lot of stress because people don't know how to deal with each other, and then where to run away to. So, sometimes the children are running away. One of the meetings we had the police department come to a meeting for Texas Children Nature because they wanted some activity to help the kids because they were running away to a park, but the parks were locked down and they were trespassing. So the police would be called. And that's something that we noticed in our own facility, is that the kids would run away. So helping children with resources, I know it's not quite climate change, but it is that because of the changes in climate, life is getting harder. Our houses are being destroyed. Down here, we get a lot of flooding. People living in poverty tend to live in areas that flood, and so they lose their home. They don't have the means to create a comfortable environment in which to live, which just exasperates a lot of the problems that we have. And so there's, of course, the need to help families create an environment that is healthy for their children and with the resources needed. And there's lots of different services for that. But there's also this aspect of using nature as therapy. And so having that relationship, finding the safe places in nature that they can go and decompress or escape to, I think is something that we're starting to see, that we really need to create that relationship. And again, because we have such a separation, there's a lack of understanding a lot from parents and families of how to use nature down here. And I think in other areas like Austin, you've got this green belt, and there's a lot of families who use that all the time. We don't quite have that here. And so that's something that we're so there's a lot, and I know I'm touching a lot of different bases, but I think with climate, recognizing that we need a relationship so we understand what's going on and where we can help in a positive way, but also helping to continue those relationships and how do we use it to help with our own mental health is really important. And I think it's tools that we need to help our youth understand. It's definitely something that, as a high school student and grew up in San Antonio, I spent a lot of time in the outdoors with an Explorer post, and nature was my therapy. I'll share a quick story. My husband and I, early on, we had a miscarriage, and one was really devastating to me. And I knew, and I did have a trip where I was out in nature, and that was where I finally kind of felt healed. So I've definitely used it in my own life throughout my life. And I think those of us who've had that exposure, who know how to be in nature and survive in nature, have that tool, and our kids don't always have that because there's that disconnect. So I think building that relationship is something that's really vital.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Marisa. A lot of what you said, I think, connects super well with what I witnessed with the youth we work with in Austin. I think the mental burden for sure is pretty big. And there's definitely that feeling, like you were mentioning, Sarah, that feeling of hopelessness, that feeling of fear, in thinking about all the doomsday things that some climate change education really starts with. And I also think that burden comes with so many of our youth who are living below the poverty line. A lot of them are immigrants from different countries in Africa, from Afghanistan, from Mexico, from Cuba, all over the place. And they don't always have like the academic language or the adult language, but they notice and they know all of the very same things that are happening right around them in their neighborhoods, in their schools, with their families, with their friends. Like in talking about, like gentrification, they see it happening right next to them, but maybe they don't use that word, gentrification. That's kind of what I'm talking about. So they notice all of those environmental injustices, environmental racism, and all of that stuff. They see it, they experience it. But the language they use to describe and talk about it is definitely different. And then I also feel like there's that sense of, as being, young people, there's that sense of like, I didn't cause this problem. So why should I have to fix it? Why should I have that kind of, it's up to the young people to do this and do that. There's definitely feel like, why is it on me to do that? Like it shouldn't be, like we shouldn't even be in this place right now type of thing. And so I do think there are many, many different layers and different things going on in young people's minds in regards to climate anxiety. And I won't, reiterate what I said earlier, but that's why in our program, we focus on the community, the connection, the joy with nature as a way of release, as a way of kind of putting down those burdens and lifting up something else.
I really appreciate everything that Marisol and Chanel just said, and completely agree. Certainly, we think about climate change, it exacerbates all current, existing stressors on someone. And when you talk about youth of color, they're marginalized, and so the stresses of daily racism and living with that, and patriarchy, and these things all just sort of combine and weigh, right? And we know this with stressors, it's just as humans, it's not like we experience one thing and then we put it in a box and then that's separate. It's all, it just accumulates more and more and more and more. And so when you think about how much stress any individual person has to endure, right? It's thinking about all these systemic layers of oppression just add more weight on. And we need to be really mindful of that when we're working with youth, and thinking about what they're already facing, and then helping to sort of try to alleviate that burden as we can. And certainly, climate change stresses everyone, but disproportionately so, right? And it exacerbates all existing inequalities that we have. It's like unbelievable how much the most marginalized folks in the community are usually going to be the worst off in the face of climate disaster. And so I think being really context specific when working with youth about the things that they are facing is really important. So for youth of color, they are more likely to be living close proximity to industry, close proximity to fossil fuel industry, dealing with emissions, dealing with higher asthma rates, dealing with higher cancer rates. We're dealing with this in our own community, actually. We're working with creating environmental justice curriculum around this in our own town of Eugene. And so thinking about how that plays out and how, fighting fossil fuel industries can start with dealing with emissions that low-income neighborhoods of color are facing, right? So really thinking very context specific about how do we alleviate the stresses that these communities are facing with heat waves, which of course Texas is having, or we're having all over the West, a lack of less, access, as Marisol said, to comfortable places, to air conditioning, is something to consider and think about. Less access, as both our other panelists were talking about, to green spaces, and green spaces that are safe to go into, that are close by to where in people's neighborhoods, right? So these are things that we all have to be really mindful of. Here in the West, with wildfires, often families of color less likely to have insurance and just in sort of the financial buffer to deal with climate trauma, right? And of course with hurricanes and other natural disasters, living in floodplains. Just less resiliency financially will stress the emotional health, right? And so that these are just things that we need to be aware of. And these are also places for action that we can address when working with youth. So like thinking about what are the stressors that they are facing in their community, connecting those to climate, and then having those be the places where you do your action and your impact, and really starting locally, I think is an important way to address that mental health burden. And giving students a chance to talk, being mindfulness, right? The importance of like really being able to sort of sit in that, to be heard, to be seen, and then feel like you're not alone.
Thank you all so much. And thank you for jumping in with some, I really appreciate the audience that has gathered here and the jumping in with some of these heavier questions. And I'm going to actually take the invitation that the panelists have offered us and remind ourselves to kind of live the things that they're saying. So this is heavy stuff, and we're in process of still learning how to hold it in our bodies, especially those of us who come from more privilege. Like with the COVID-19 pandemic, it was often the ones with the most privilege who felt the shifts the hardest in some ways, and that it was a loss of privilege. So learning to hold this in our bodies, maybe we might take a moment to be back in our bodies. So notice where your feet are. Are they connected to the ground? Are they maybe on your chair, or if you like to sit on them like I do? What temperature are your feet? Are they hot or cold? Can you feel any air on them, or are they covered in socks and shoes? It's kind of take a moment to kind of check in with each of your toes. And then take a moment to look around the room, see where the windows are and where the exits are. Sometimes when we're on Zoom, we forget we're in a body, in a space. So just taking a moment to remind your body that in this moment, it's safe. We'll definitely deal with some topics that bring up a lot of discomfort, and we're growing our own capacity to sit with that discomfort, but just to remind your body, not to bypass the feelings, but to grow our capacity to feel the feelings. Yeah, and you can engage in those practices anytime you need to. Thank you, panelists. I think we have probably time for one or two more questions to really hear from your knowledge. It looks like the next one that has been upvoted was a storytelling feature in your engagement with youth on issues of climate change? And if so, what role does it play? And what sorts of stories are involved? And I'll put that in the chat as well.
I'm happy to take this one on first, and I might lean in on you, Nick, to share a bit about what our, the River Watchers did together with Planet 2050 over last summer when you joined our summer program, and then I think it was the fall of 2020 when we did it virtually. But we, partnered with Nick to work with our students to learn and talk about their stories related to climate change. And without talking about both separately, they kind of came out in this way that I think was really connected. And I guess also touching on like what I mentioned earlier about how the majority of the students in our program are Black and Brown, and a lot of them come from immigrant families. so much of their stories really came from a very deep, like, cultural place. And those are stories that mainstream wise, you don't always hear told in that way. Stories that were told in both Spanish and English, stories that were told through drawing or music or writing, stories that were told that involved multi-generations of, like, family and friends and connection, and story that also was, like, connected to the land in a way that, in thinking, you know, mainstream wise, wasn't something that I felt, as someone who's in the environmental industry, been here for a while, like, it wasn't there. The stories were told so differently in ways that I tended to not hear about. And so working with, like, Planet 2050 has really helped, like, bring more of that into our programming. Our programming tends to be more hands-on, environmental science based. And so bringing in more of those aspects has, like, allowed so many of our students to speak about themselves and their personal connection to nature and the outdoors in a way that's really different. And so it wasn't something that I necessarily had personally, like, the thought, but in working with Nick and I'm forgetting a couple other people's names who really brought that to our program, and we've, you know, kind of kept it going since then. So yeah, that's kind of how it's been going for us.
Yeah, Sarah or Marisa, do you have any
Sure, I can
additions?
step in. So storytelling, we cannot underestimate the importance of storytelling around climate change. One of the sort of greatest challenges of teaching and thinking and communicating about climate change is that it is, on the surface, it seems like this big, abstract, global problem. But when you really start getting down to it, it's just rife with all kinds of context. I think every single question I keep saying the importance of context, right? The context of the people that you're working with and the community and the struggles that community is facing, because that's how we feel it and that's how we can connect to it. And my own research with teens studying climate change and going to Bangladesh to learn about climate change, and this was before it was quite so obvious here in the US, shows that just this need for personal connection makes it really real and sort of sinks in, and also makes it more meaningful to students and really kind of gives them a place to feel empathy and to this major abstract problem. And so stories are one of the best tools that we have as humans to make these connections, because we live our lives as a single human being and the planet. And that's how we understand things, and that's how we process. So learning through storytelling cannot be underestimated. Yale Climate Connection is a wonderful resource for stories, and they're doing a lot of work with storytelling there. With my own students, especially my college students, when we start my climate activism class, we start the class actually by having every single person reflect and tell their own climate story. And what's been really noticeable to me is that even students who admittedly haven't thought about climate change at all before they start the class have a climate story when they really stop to think about it. Partly that's because of our context here in Oregon. We've had such tremendous impact, as I mentioned, from wildfire and from smoke and from just constant air pollution issues for a lot of months of the year, and from drought, that it's now becoming a real lived experience with everyone. But it's a way to kind of bring it home and build some empathy across our community and have students sort of really feel each other. It's been a place where I've had students say they've lost their homes because of wildfire. I've had students who've had disruptions to their lives since some of my undergrads have had disruptions, memorable disruptions to their lives since they were fifth graders because of climate issues, because of air pollution issues, and due to fires. And so these are things we never would have gotten to had we not stopped and started with storytelling. And so it's one of the most powerful tools we have on so many levels for building empathy, connection, compassion, understanding, and also across difference, right? It's a nice way to build empathy and compassion across different people and different places, because we can connect it to our own personal stories in ways that we might not be able to connect to just like facts and figures.
Thank you, Sarah Chanel. I will add just one thing that's been driven home to me a lot this year through some of the research that we've been doing. And that is that down here in the Rio Grande Valley, we're 90% Hispanic, and 30% about 30% are Spanish speaking only. And that's really exacerbated in the daycare settings, where the daycare providers that are working there, a lot of them are Spanish speaking only, and the kids that come in are Spanish speaking only. And then you've got 50 to 70% that are bilingual. Yet, when we look at all the different outreach programs, advertisements, everything that we do in any kind of writing or language, it's mostly done in English. And what's become apparent is that, at least down here in the Valley, we need to do a much better job of making sure that everything is bilingual. Our signage, our advertisements, everything on our trails, everything that we do. A lot of us have been better about making sure that we have staff that are Spanish speaking so that they can translate and speak to folks. But a lot of other things that we put out there aren't. And so that's just something where we're not reaching people where they're at. And so because of that, there's a lack of understanding. And so the stories are important, but we also make sure we need to be making a home for them in the language that people speak. And I'm in Houston. I know Houston, if you're in Houston, there's a lot of other different languages too, a lot of different cultures, and in Dallas besides Spanish. And so making sure that we are creating these spaces and viewing it through that lens everywhere we go.
Thank you all so much. And we are coming, unfortunately, getting to spend time with these awesome experiences and minds and bodies and hearts. And if you do have to leave at the hour, totally understand. But I do want to finish on kind of one question that will also hopefully provide everyone with kind of a platform to thank you for stopping by. Yeah, if you need to leave, totally understand. But our final question is about, it's kind of a summing up of what we've heard so far. We've heard about hope, and we've heard about action, and we've started to think about how those might be interrelated as kind of a theory of change and an antidote to some of the heavier parts of this. If our panelists have time, what resources are available for helping us with climate action? And they don't necessarily have to be websites or things like that, but what have you found that is helpful for working with young people and on the action side?
That is something in the Rio Grande Valley that we are trying to address, especially with Texas Children Nature Network. One of the big things that we're learning is that, one, there's a lot of organizations that are doing great work in their individual silos, and not everybody knows what each other's doing. And so it's a lot of this year for me has been a wake-up call as to what's going on in the Valley. Even though I feel well connected, there's just so much more. And then because of that, when people are like coming across a problem or they're trying to problem solve, they don't realize what resources are already available for free or through partnerships. And so it's working our connections, because all of us in this industry are trying to serve youth or serve families, and we're trying to get them as many resources as possible, but we don't always know what's around us. And so doing a better job of connecting our organizations together and sharing those resources is really important down here so that we're not just working in our silos and we can have a bigger impact overall.
I can go ahead and go. I think in terms of thinking about actions and what's available, there are tons of national organizations that are doing really great work. And so we can send some links and some recommendations, but thinking also about your local community. Does your town or your county have a climate action plan? And if it is, what stage is it in? Where might you connect in and help push it and to see who's doing what, right? Like what organizations are local doing work, what environmental justice organizations are in your area, and really kind of see how you can collaborate with local folks and then statewide, right? Like I'm working with a group of teachers and we're pushing climate ed statewide, right? We're working with our legislatures to try to get climate education required. And so that's an example of something. And this is a movement that's happening in different places. So do educators need your support and help? So yeah, I would just basically say start local for action, especially with young people, because it can be really empowering to actually go to meetings and have young people speak and be heard and feel like they can do something. Whereas on the national level, I mean, you know where we are politically, federally, and obviously we're in a better place at the moment with our current administration, but it's still challenging. And so helping students really feel and truly, action at the local level is so important. And that's where we make change. And so I think, really looking around, like Marissa said, and finding out who's doing what is really, really important. And seeing how you can join forces, because it's coalition, right? It's nobody by themselves doing the work by themselves. We're all working together. The more we work together, the more we can make a difference.
Just to follow up on that, something that I worked with a crew of my students last year with the help of this organization called Earth Force, and did a training with them on kind of how to implement more environmental action civics into our programming. And so it's a like kind of specific process that they help you through. Like it's got some steps, some worksheets, and all sorts of things to really come up with, not me come up with, but facilitate youth coming up with an environmental issue that they care about. And also like the whole entire process is driven and led by them, as well as that solution at the end. And the solution gets at the root cause of the issue, not a Band-Aid kind of solution. And so specifically, my students, we worked at a local park, Bartholomew Park, just a little neighborhood park, and they found the issue they cared the most about was trash, and also its connection to the homeless population that live along creeks in local parks. And so did lots of work over the course of the whole entire school year. And at the end, they decided what they wanted to do was write a letter to the local neighborhood association and a couple local officials as well, that they wrote, like the letter was all their words verbatim, that we sent out, got responses from. This year we just started up programming, so we'll see where we'll take it. We got a couple invitations to like go speak at city council and things like that, and so that was something like for them, the whole course of the year. If I would have told them that they were going to write a letter to their local officials, they would have been like, no, why would we do that? No one's going to listen. They wouldn't necessarily, might not even care about doing it. But because through the whole process, they really picked up on how valuable their opinions are, because I really took a step back as their facilitator and they drove the whole entire thing. And this is, of course, like high school youth who are doing this, high school and college age youth who are working on this project. And so that was a resource that was really helpful for me and our organization in the age group that we work with. And working on, not small, right, but like local issues that are feasible for youth to like really tackle. And not to say that we solved the trash problem at the park necessarily, but to really start getting at the root causes and understanding the root causes of the issues that we're experiencing and seeing in Austin specifically. And that was really helpful. And honestly, like it changed my mindset and a lot of the students as well in regards to like actually doing something that you see all the time, that you complain about all the time. And it made us feel pretty good.
Thank you all so much for your time today, for listening and for sharing your wisdom. Apologies for running a little bit over. I just couldn't help myself. I really wanted to know about that last question. And Jonathan, did you have any announcements or closing remarks you wanted to make sure we heard before we all sign off?
No, just well, thank you all. Thank you to all the panelists and to our audience for being here. All the links that Sarah and others put in the chat, I added to that document, which will then be sent out to everyone who registered for this, so even the ones who weren't able to join. And these will be monthly meetings for the rest of this semester. We're still working out the details, but they will be on the second Wednesday of the month at noon. And yes, thanks again to all of you for being here.